You've probably heard that story of the Titanic, the so-called unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg and sank. But how much of that story is actually true? In this video, we'll take a closer look at some of the biggest misconceptions people still believe about the Titanic today. One of the most famous Titanic stories is that it was advertised as the unsinkable ship.
Now that's a voyage worth taking.
But here's the surprising part. That's not entirely true. Before Titanic's maiden voyage in 1912, its builders and owners were certainly confident in the ship's design. Titanic had advanced watertight compartments to help it stay afloat after damage.
She's built to withstand serious damage.
That's incredible.
Practically unsinkable.
So I can stop worrying.
I'd worry more about the dinner menu than this ship.
Because of this, some newspapers and industry publications describe the ship as practically unsinkable. However, there is no evidence that the White Star Line officially advertised Titanic as completely unsinkable. In fact, the famous label became much more popular after the disaster. As people struggled to understand how such a modern and luxurious ship could sink, the story of the unsinkable ship added a powerful layer of irony to the tragedy. Titanic was one of the safest ships of its time, but it was never officially promoted as impossible to sink. Many people imagine the Titanic striking the iceberg with a deafening crash that tore a massive hole down the side of the ship. But that's probably not what happened. Second officer of the Titanic, Charles Lightoller, later testified that the collision felt like a slight shock, a slight trembling, and a grinding sound. The real damage was also very different from what most people imagine. Investigators believe the iceberg caused a series of smaller openings and buckled steel plates along the hull. Individually, these breaches were relatively small, but together they flooded multiple watertight compartments. So the Titanic didn't sink because of one giant hole or one dramatic impact.
Open the gates! We're trapped! Let us out!
My children are here with me!
We are going to die!
But did that really happen? The reality is more complicated. Titanic did have gates separating passenger classes, but these barriers mainly existed because of immigration regulations at the time. Authorities wanted different groups of passengers kept apart before arriving in America. There is little evidence that officers deliberately locked third-class passengers below deck and left them there to die. However, many third-class passengers still faced serious disadvantages. Their cabins were located deep inside the ship, farther from the lifeboats, and many were unfamiliar with Titanic's complicated layout. Language barriers and confusion during the evacuation also slowed some people down.
Move this way! Quickly! ¿Qué cosa está diciendo?
So, while third-class passengers faced many disadvantages and had low survival rate, the idea that they were deliberately locked below deck is largely a Hollywood myth. You've heard that Titanic's band played right until the very last second before the ship disappeared beneath the waves. And yeah, multiple survivors did report hearing the musicians perform during the evacuation. Their music helped calm frightened passengers as lifeboats were being lowered, but no one knows exactly when the band stopped playing. All the musicians died in the disaster, leaving no eyewitness account of their final moments. Some survivors believe the music continued until the end, while others remembered it stopping earlier in the evacuation. So, although the band's courage is undeniable, the idea that they played until the very last second remains uncertain. Not a confirmed historical fact. Everyone remembers the iceberg for sinking the Titanic, but the disaster was already unfolding long before the collision. Yes, the iceberg caused the damage, but it wasn't the only reason the disaster happened. Before the collision, the Titanic had already received multiple iceberg warnings. Despite that, the ship continued at a high speed through dangerous waters. The lookout crew also didn't have binoculars, making it harder to spot hazards in time. Calm weather and unusually still seas made icebergs even more difficult to see.
I can't see clearly. Wait, what's that ahead?
Then, after the collision, there weren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board.
There are thousands of us, and only these few lifeboats.
And although the ship's watertight compartments were advanced for their time, they weren't designed to handle flooding across so many compartments.
She wasn't designed for this much flooding!
So the ship didn't sink because of one iceberg alone. It was the result of a chain of decisions, conditions, and design limitations that turned a single collision into one of history's greatest maritime disasters. I guess you have watched the tragic love story of Jack and Rose in the movie Titanic. But did those two passengers actually exist? The answer is no. Jack Dawson and Rose DeWitt Bukater were fictional characters created by filmmaker James Cameron for the 1997 movie Titanic. Their romance was invented to give audiences a personal way to experience the disaster. However, that doesn't mean the entire story was fictional. The film was inspired by many real passengers whose stories of love, courage, sacrifice, and survival were documented after the sinking. Several real people, including crew members and first-class passengers, even appear in the movie alongside the fictional characters. So, while Jack and Rose never existed, their story represents the very real experiences of thousands of people whose lives were forever changed on the night Titanic sank.